Have you ever felt invisible in someone's presence? Have you ever been in a room full of people, yet felt like no one truly saw you? Or worse, felt as though your worth had suddenly diminished in their eyes? The sting of being overlooked, dismissed, or undervalued can be one of the most painful emotional experiences. It's almost as if a part of you, your essence, your very being, was suddenly rendered insignificant. But here's a thought to consider. In the teachings of Zen and Buddhist philosophy, it's said that we are not obligated to remain where we are not cherished. This ancient wisdom reminds us of a powerful truth. We don't have to stay in spaces or relationships that do not honor or appreciate our true value. Much like the lotus that blooms in the rich soil of a pond, we too need an environment where we are nurtured, where our presence is respected, and our worth is acknowledged. There's a profound saying in Zen: the lotus does not bloom in barren land. This is more than just a poetic metaphor. It speaks to the impermanence of life and the importance of self-respect. In a world where relationships, circumstances, and perceptions constantly change, one thing remains certain: your worth is not defined by how others see you, but by how you see yourself. But when someone doesn't value you anymore, what do? The tendency might be to chase their approval, to beg for their recognition, to fight for a place in their life. But here's where Zen offers a powerful, transformative lesson. There's a simple yet profound trick, a shift in perspective, that can change the dynamic in ways you might not expect. It's not about trying to prove your value to others. It's about reclaiming your own sense of worth, regardless of anyone else's recognition. So, stay with me for a moment, and I'll share with you how a practice rooted in self-respect and detachment can be the key to unlocking a life of peace, authenticity, and inner strength. This simple yet transformative approach can bring about a profound shift in how you experience relationships, success, and, most importantly, your relationship with yourself. Are you ready to learn how? Let's dive in. 1. The lesson of self-respect. Imagine a seeker who found solace in a life of simplicity, surrounded by the gentle whispers of nature, a canopy of trees swaying in the breeze, the tranquil murmur of a nearby stream. Their days were filled with purpose, offering wisdom and compassion to those who came seeking it. They gave freely, expecting nothing in return, embodying the very essence of generosity. Their joy lay in helping others find clarity, guiding them through their struggles, and sharing insights from years of mindfulness and meditation. But as the seasons passed, the dynamics began to shift. Those who had once flocked to the seeker for guidance seemed to drift away. The gratitude that once colored their interactions turned into complacency, and the warmth of connection was replaced with indifference. The seeker's kindness, which once illuminated the lives of others, became a quiet shadow, unacknowledged and overlooked. Their efforts, once cherished, now felt invisible. The seeker, though steadfast in their principles, could not help but feel a pang of sorrow. A quiet question began to echo within their heart. Why have my contributions, once valued, now gone unnoticed? Why does my presence no longer hold meaning to those I care for? These questions weighed heavily, sowing seeds of doubt that began to take root in their mind. Feeling lost, the seeker turned to their Zen master, a teacher known for their profound insights and simple, yet transformative, wisdom. The master listened with patience as the seeker poured out their pain and confusion. When the seeker finished, the master was silent for a moment, their gaze serene but intent. Then, with a calm voice, the master asked, "When you pour water into a cup that is already full, what happens?" The seeker frowned, perplexed by the question. "It overflows," they replied, unsure of its relevance. The master smiled knowingly. "Exactly," they said. "You are pouring your energy, your essence, into a space that is already full of assumptions, distractions, or perhaps indifference. It has no room to receive what you offer. The time has come for you to reclaim your essence and redirect it wisely." These words struck the seeker like a sudden ray of light breaking through a dense fog. For so long, they had equated their worth with how others responded to their kindness. They had believed their value lay in the validation of those they helped. Yet, Here was a truth that resonated on a deeper level. Their worth was not contingent on others' recognition. It was intrinsic, unshakable, and independent of external circumstances. The master continued, their voice steady and compassionate. When a garden no longer yields flowers despite your care, it is not because the gardener lacks skill. Sometimes, the soil itself needs to rest. Or perhaps your efforts are better directed to a place where seeds can thrive. To keep giving in a space that cannot appreciate your gifts only depletes your energy. The first step to balance is to recognize this and choose to nurture spaces where your essence is valued. These words carried profound clarity. For the first time, the seeker saw their situation not as a failure, but as a natural part of life's ebb and flow. They began to understand that their current struggles were not a reflection of their inadequacy, but an invitation to realign their energy. With this newfound perspective, the seeker resolved to stop pouring into spaces that could not or would not receive their gifts. Instead, they would turn inward, rediscover their own essence, and seek balance within. It was not about withdrawing in bitterness, but about honoring their worth and redirecting their energy with wisdom. This realization was the first step toward reclaiming their peace and finding a deeper harmony with themselves and the world around them. 2. The power of absence. At first glance, the idea of stepping back, of withdrawing from people who no longer appreciate you, may seem counterintuitive, even passive. After all, in a world where we are often taught to fight for our place, to assert ourselves, and to seek validation, retreating could feel like surrender. However, the Master's wisdom offered a deeper truth. Absence creates space for appreciation. Sometimes, the greatest act of strength is not to push forward, but to step back, giving the world room to recognize what it has taken for granted. The seeker, following this teaching, made the decision to withdraw. They stopped offering unsolicited advice, stopped extending themselves when others didn't ask for help, and ceased initiating conversations that once came naturally. This wasn't out of bitterness or anger, but as a simple act of detachment. By stepping away, they were no longer filling the space that had become overcrowded with neglect and indifference. They chose instead to focus inward, nurturing their own growth and understanding. The first days of silence were awkward, both for the seeker and for those around them. The shift was palpable. People, who had once come to rely on the seeker's wisdom and guidance, suddenly felt an absence they hadn't anticipated. Simple tasks that the seeker used to handle effortlessly now became burdensome. The ease with which they had navigated conversations, offered insight, and provided support had been taken for granted. But now, with the seeker's absence, it became glaringly obvious. What was once abundant had now become scarce. And in that scarcity, the value of the seeker's presence began to emerge. The beauty of this lesson lies in its simplicity. Absence allows for true appreciation. When something or someone is constantly available, its value can easily be overlooked. We often take for granted the steady presence of the things that we rely on. But when that presence fades, the void left behind forces us to reevaluate, to reflect on what we had and what we lost. In this way, the absence of the seeker did not scream for attention or validation. Instead, it created a natural space for reflection, a pause that allowed others to realize just how much the seeker had contributed and how much their wisdom had been relied upon. This wasn't about seeking revenge or proving a point. The seeker wasn't trying to manipulate anyone's perception of their worth, nor were they looking for validation through the discomfort of others. This was about balance, about reclaiming their own energy and honoring their value without having to argue for it. The lesson here is that true value cannot be proven by constant striving or by pleading for recognition. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply to step back and let others see your worth through the absence of your presence. And as the days passed, people began to realize that they missed the seeker's wisdom, their kindness, and their steady support. They began to reflect on how they had taken the seeker for granted, and slowly, some approached, asking for guidance again. But this time, the dynamic was different. The seeker was no longer chasing after approval, no longer trying to be seen. Their worth had been revealed not through constant effort, but through the space that had been created when they stepped back. This power of absence speaks to a deeper truth. When you no longer chase the approval of others, you allow them the space to appreciate what you bring. You show, through your detachment, that your value is not dependent on their recognition. It stands on its own, and in this stillness, others may be able to see it more clearly, and in turn, recognize their own need for what you offer. This was the true lesson for the seeker. You don't need to prove your worth to anyone. When you honor your own value, others will begin to see it. 2. The Master's wisdom had led the seeker to the realization that sometimes, the greatest act of respect we can give to ourselves and to others is to step back and let them recognize the power and beauty of our presence in their lives, without the need for constant validation or effort. In this way, absence didn't diminish the seeker's worth, it highlighted it. It gave others the chance to reflect, to appreciate, and to realize what they had been taking for granted. And in the end, the lesson was clear. The most profound way to make your value known is to allow others the space to truly see it. 3. Inner strength and the practice of non-self. During this period of deep silence and reflection, the seeker began a transformative journey inward. They had withdrawn from the constant need to be seen and validated by others, creating space for introspection and healing. The world outside faded, but in the stillness of their own mind, they found something far more profound, an opportunity to connect with their inner essence. The Zen master, ever patient and wise, introduced the seeker to the concept of anatta, or non-self, a cornerstone of Buddhist philosophy that teaches the fluid and impermanent nature of the self. It is a teaching that challenges our deepest attachments to who we think we are, and to the identities we construct based on external validation. The Master explained that our suffering often stems from the belief that we need to be confirmed by others, whether through recognition, affection, or approval. The more we chase after these external validations, the more fragile our sense of self becomes, because it is never fully under our control. Through mindfulness and meditation, the seeker began to explore the truth of anatta. They spent hours each day sitting in stillness, observing their thoughts and feelings without judgment. They saw how their mind, like a restless river, would often drift toward the need for external acknowledgement. The seeker's mind would ask, "Am I valued? Do they appreciate me? Am I enough?" But the practice of mindfulness taught them something profound. These thoughts were not who they truly were. They were just temporary ripples on the surface of their mind, constantly shifting and changing. The seeker began to embrace the mantra, "I am enough," not because others say so, but because I exist. With each repetition, they felt a subtle shift inside, a deep sense of knowing that their worth was not dependent on the fleeting judgments of others. It was inherent, a part of their very being. They were enough, simply because they existed. This was not a self-centered or egotistical affirmation, but a recognition of the deep, untouchable core that exists within all of us, beyond the labels and external expectations. As the seeker practiced non-attachment, they realized that the fluctuations in their emotions and self-worth were often tied to their attachments to other people's perceptions. They saw that their true self, untouched by praise or criticism, was calm, stable, and free. It was a self that existed independent of external circumstances. No longer did the seeker feel the need to explain or defend themselves. Their sense of peace grew stronger each day, and as time passed, the ripple effect of the seeker's transformation began to unfold in the external world. People who had once taken the seeker's presence for granted began to notice their absence. At first, there was confusion, as the seeker's steady wisdom and compassion were no longer easily accessible. But then, slowly, some of those who had undervalued the seeker began to reflect on their behavior. They felt the void left behind and recognized that the seeker had been a source of wisdom, kindness, and balance in their lives. Some came forward with sincere apologies, acknowledging the harm they had caused by taking the seeker for granted. Others remained distant, still gripped by their own egos, unwilling to acknowledge their actions. But the seeker, having understood the power of non-self, did not react to these changes with expectation. They did not seek validation or apologies. The Zen master's words echoed in their heart. Not everyone will acknowledge your worth, and that is not your burden to bear. What matters is that you have reclaimed your peace and self-respect. The seeker now understood that their peace did not depend on the approval of others. True strength lay in the ability to maintain inner harmony, regardless of how others chose to see them. In this realization, the seeker experienced a profound liberation. They were no longer a victim of external circumstances or other people's judgments. Their sense of self-worth had become unshakable because it was no longer tied to anything outside themselves. This was the freedom that anatta offered, the freedom from the need to prove oneself, the freedom from the prison of ego. The seeker had transcended the need for validation, for praise, or for recognition. They had found something far more valuable, the deep, unshakable peace of knowing who they truly were. This shift in consciousness didn't just affect the seeker, it changed their entire experience of the world. As their inner strength grew, they became a beacon of calm and clarity for others. They no longer had to strive for others to see their value. Their actions, rooted in deep self-respect, spoke louder than words. And for those who were open to it, the seeker's presence became an invitation, a silent call to find their own inner strength, their own unshakable sense of self. The Master, ever wise, continued to guide the seeker on this path. Remember, he said, what others think of you is not your business. What matters is how you see yourself. When you have reclaimed your peace and your self-respect, you will no longer be at the mercy of external opinions. You will be free. In embracing the practice of non-self, the seeker had discovered a new way of being, a way of being that was independent, whole, and deeply grounded. They had learned that their worth was not something that could be given or taken away by others. It was a natural, unchangeable part of who they were. And in this realization, they had found a power far greater than anything external validation could ever provide. The power of knowing that they were enough, simply because they existed. The power of detachment and freedom. In Zen philosophy, we are taught that everything is in a constant state of change, a truth encapsulated by the word impermanence. Nothing, no situation, and no relationship is permanent. Like the ebb and flow of the tides, like the changing of the seasons, everything moves, shifts, and eventually fades away. This understanding invites us to live with an awareness that nothing lasts forever. Neither the challenges we face nor the people we encounter. Clinging to something or someone that no longer serves us is like holding onto the remnants of a season long past. It only prolongs our suffering. The Zen master, wise as ever, shared a parable to help the seeker understand this vital lesson. He spoke of a tree that bore sweet fruits, offering its bounty to those who sought it. People came from all around to enjoy its shade and nourishment. But over time, some grew careless. They carved their names into its bark, breaking its branches, taking its gifts without gratitude. Despite this, the tree stood tall and silent, offering its fruits without complaint. It did not argue with those who damaged it, nor did it withdraw in bitterness. It simply gave, because giving was its nature. And when the time came for it to shed its leaves, it did so with grace, knowing that new growth would eventually come. This parable holds a powerful lesson. Offer your best without expectation, but also recognize when it's time to let go. The tree did not attach itself to the people who disrespected it, nor did it cling to the past. Even though it had once been cherished, it knew that nothing lasts forever, and that its purpose was not bound to how others treated it. Its worth was intrinsic, not defined by the actions or approval of others. The tree did not need to prove its value. It simply existed, offering what it could, knowing that everything must change in its own time. For the seeker, this story was a turning point. They began to understand that their own worth was not dependent on others' recognition or respect. They had spent too long trying to convince those who undervalued them of their importance. But now, having embraced the lesson of impermanence and detachment, they realized the truth. True freedom lies in letting go. The seeker no longer felt the need to prove their worth to anyone. They had discovered that their value was not something that could be earned through effort or external validation. It was already present within them, as natural as the tree's fruit. the more they let go of their attachment to the opinions of others, the more they were able to cultivate their own peace and self-respect. They began to see their life as a journey of inner growth, not one that needed to be measured by the approval or recognition of others. This shift in perspective created space for something transformative. As the seeker detached from the need for validation, they started attracting relationships and opportunities that resonated with their true self. They no longer wasted their energy on people who dismissed or took them for granted. Instead, they cultivated a life rooted in self-respect and peace. Their relationships became more genuine, based on mutual respect and understanding, not on the desire to prove anything. Opportunities came that aligned with their values, rather than ones they had to chase after in order to feel worthy. The act of detaching from others' judgments is not about abandoning relationships or cutting ties with people. It's about recognizing when a relationship no longer nurtures your growth, when it has become toxic or one-sided, and having the courage to let go of it. This is not an act of bitterness or resentment, but an act of self-love. By letting go, you make room for new growth. You create space for people, situations, and opportunities that will help you evolve into your highest self. The Master had guided the seeker to a place where they no longer relied on external factors to define their worth. By embracing the impermanence of relationships, they were able to let go of attachment to the people who had not valued them and focus on cultivating a life that was true to their essence. In doing so, they found themselves not only surrounded by people who appreciated them, but also living in alignment with their true purpose. True freedom, the Master taught, comes not from holding on to things, but from letting go of them. It is in the acceptance of impermanence, in understanding that nothing in life is permanent, that we can truly live in peace. When we detach from what no longer serves us, we allow space for new growth, new opportunities, and new relationships that reflect the person we are becoming. In the end, the seeker's transformation was not just about letting go of those who undervalued them. It was about letting go of the need to seek validation from anyone. It was about stepping into their true power and freedom. Freedom to live authentically, free from the expectations of others. The seeker's life was no longer dictated by the opinions of those around them. They had learned that the key to lasting happiness lies not in holding on to what we think we need, but in the power of detachment and the acceptance of life's natural ebb and flow. 5. Love and boundaries. What happens when someone asks, "But what if I love those who undervalue me? What if I can't bear to let them go?" The seeker's response was simple, but profound. True love must start with love for yourself. This statement is deceptively simple, yet it holds a wisdom that many of us overlook. We are often conditioned to believe that love means sacrificing ourselves, enduring mistreatment, and remaining in relationships or situations that diminish our worth. We think that by staying, we are showing love. But the truth is, love that is not rooted in self-respect is not love at all. It is self-sabotage. True love begins with the relationship we have with ourselves. If we don't love and value ourselves, how can we expect others to? And if we allow others to treat us poorly, we send the message that we don't believe we deserve better. The moment we recognize that we are worthy of respect, we begin to set boundaries, not as a form of punishment, but as a declaration of our self-worth. Setting boundaries is not an act of anger or rejection. It is an act of self-respect. It is recognizing that our peace and our emotional well-being are just as important as the love we give to others. Boundaries are not walls. They are markers of self-love. They tell the world, I honor myself enough to walk away from situations that drain me or people who dismiss my worth. The seeker understood this in a deep way. They realized that by loving themselves enough to set boundaries, they reclaimed their power. They didn't have to chase after validation from people who took them for granted. They didn't have to beg for respect or force others to appreciate them. Instead, they chose to protect their energy and their peace. They learned that the greatest act of love they could offer to others was to first love and honor themselves. This doesn't mean we stop loving others or cut them off at the first sign of disagreement or discomfort. Love is not about withdrawing or closing ourselves off. True love, in its purest form, is about offering ourselves fully without losing ourselves. It's about having the courage to love from a place of strength, not from a place of neediness or fear of abandonment. When we set boundaries, we are not saying to others, "I don't love you." We are saying, "I love myself enough to not tolerate being treated in a way that diminishes me." We are saying, "I love you enough to show you what respect looks like by demonstrating it first toward myself." Boundaries teach others how to treat us, and they also teach us how to protect our peace. The seeker's journey was not just about reclaiming their self-worth. It was about redefining what love meant in their life. They learned that love is not about sacrificing who we are for the sake of others, but about honoring our own needs, values, and boundaries. It's about creating space in our lives for relationships that nurture and support us, and letting go of those that drain or belittle us. Through this lesson, the seeker discovered that love, true love, doesn't need to be proven or earned. It simply is. And it starts with the love we have for ourselves. Only when we love ourselves fully can we offer love to others in a way that is healthy, authentic, and unencumbered by the need for approval or validation. Setting boundaries is not a rejection of others. It is an invitation for them to respect our worth and treat us with the care and consideration we deserve. In setting boundaries, we create the space for real love to flourish, a love that is based on mutual respect, shared values, and a deep understanding of each other's worth. The seeker's transformation was not just about stepping back from those who undervalued them. It was about stepping into a space where they no longer tolerated disrespect or compromise. They had learned the powerful lesson that self-love and boundaries are not selfish. They are essential for creating the kind of relationships and life we all deserve. When we love ourselves enough to set boundaries, we no longer need to fight for our worth. We simply live it, and the world will reflect it back to us. True love is not about enduring mistreatment or sacrificing our peace. It is about protecting our inner harmony while continuing to give and receive love in ways that nourish and uplift. When we set boundaries from a place of self-respect, we not only protect our own well-being, but we also invite others to step into the fullness of their own self-worth. It's a powerful, transformative act that changes not only our relationships but our lives as a whole. 6. The ripple effect. The master taught the seeker that by valuing oneself, one sends out ripples into the world. Your journey is like this ripple, the master said. By valuing yourself, you send waves of respect and balance into the world. Those ripples will reach others, inspiring them to do the same. But remember, the ripple starts at the center, with you. This is a profound truth that many of us often overlook. We tend to think that the impact we have on others starts with their actions or words toward us. But in reality, the most powerful impact we have on the world begins from within. When we choose to honor our own worth, we create a wave of energy that radiates outward, touching everything around us, whether we are aware of it or not. Imagine, for a moment, that you are standing at the center of a calm pond. The smallest stone, when dropped into the water, creates ripples that extend far beyond the initial point of impact. The ripple effect doesn't stop at the edge of the pond. It continues, touching every corner of the water's surface, transforming it, just as our own inner transformation has the power to reach beyond our immediate surroundings. As the seeker walked the path of self-respect, they stopped viewing rejection as a misfortune. Instead, they embraced it as a blessing, an opportunity for growth and a reminder of the impermanence of all things. The seeker understood that everything in life, whether it's relationships, situations, or emotions, comes and goes, and that none of it defines our true worth. In this understanding, the seeker no longer clung to the approval or validation of others. They knew that true peace and self-worth come from within, not from external sources. The transformation of the seeker was quiet, not loud. It wasn't about seeking attention or proving something to others. It was a steady, unwavering presence that came from living authentically and in alignment with their own values. It was the kind of transformation that didn't need to shout its greatness. It simply radiated, like the ripples expanding outward from the stone in the water. People began to notice this subtle shift. The seeker's presence, once taken for granted, was now felt deeply. There was something magnetic about their calm assurance, the way they moved through the world without clinging to external validation. They had learned the true meaning of self-worth, not as something to be earned or given by others, but as something intrinsic, something that could never be diminished by the actions or words of others. The ripples they sent out into the world weren't just about attracting the right people or opportunities. They also inspired others to take a closer look at their own self-worth. By valuing themselves, the seeker became a mirror to those around them. They showed others what it meant to set boundaries, to protect one's peace, and to honor one's true value. And in doing so, they sparked a ripple effect that touched the lives of others in ways they couldn't have anticipated. As these ripples expanded, the seeker's life began to change. They no longer had to fight for validation or approval. Their actions, their energy, and their presence spoke volumes. And those who were meant to be in their life, those who respected their boundaries and their worth, were naturally drawn toward them. The seeker became a magnet for relationships and opportunities that aligned with their true self, and they saw their life transform from one of striving and seeking to one of peace and fulfillment. This ripple effect is something we can all tap into. When we choose to value ourselves, we don't just change our own lives, we change the lives of those around us. The respect we show ourselves sends out waves of positive energy that others can feel. It encourages them to recognize their own worth, to set their own boundaries, and to live authentically. Our own self-respect becomes a light that illuminates the way for others. But this transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process, a quiet revolution that begins at the center, within us. The more we practice self-respect and authenticity, the stronger the ripple becomes. It starts with one person, one moment of self-awareness, and then it continues to spread. And as the ripples expand, they create a more balanced, more harmonious world, one where people value themselves, respect each other's boundaries, and live in alignment with their true selves. The seeker's journey teaches us that we don't have to seek out validation or approval from the world. By valuing ourselves, we create an energy that is felt by others, inspiring them to value themselves too. And in this way, the world begins to change, not because we are forcing it, but because we are living our truth and allowing that truth to ripple outward, touching every life we encounter. So remember, the ripple always starts at the center, with you. You have the power to create waves of change, not just in your own life, but in the world around you. When you choose to value yourself, you become a part of something far greater than just your own journey. You become part of a collective transformation that can inspire others to walk the path of self-respect and authenticity. This is the true power of the ripple effect. Zen teaches us that we do not need to beg for attention. We bloom in our own time, in our own way. Just like the lotus that blooms in the murky waters, we too have the ability to grow and radiate peace, even when the world around us may not see it right away. The lotus, rooted deep in the mud, draws its nourishment from a place of darkness and struggle. But it does not strive. It does not fight for attention. When the time is right, it rises above the water, unfolding in its full, radiant beauty. And in that moment, no one questions its worth. It doesn't need validation, nor does it seek it. Its presence alone speaks volumes. We are like that lotus. Our true worth is not dependent on the opinions of others or the circumstances around us. Even when we feel unseen, undervalued, or overlooked, there is power in choosing to grow in our own time and in our own way. The world may not always recognize our brilliance at first, but when we stay true to who we are, we will bloom at the right moment and in the right place. So, if someone doesn't value you anymore, the trick is not to convince them otherwise. Instead, value yourself even more. In fact, let your absence be a statement of your self-respect. Step back, turn inward, and observe how your absence creates space for reflection and appreciation. People may not immediately recognize your worth, but as they experience the absence of your energy, they will begin to realize how much they took it for granted. And in that space, they will have the opportunity to reflect on their actions and their own values. Let go of what no longer serves you. Detachment is not about coldness or rejection, but about setting boundaries that allow you to protect your peace and honor your true self. It's about choosing not to remain in spaces where your worth is not acknowledged, and instead, embracing the freedom that comes with being authentically you. The path of self-respect is the path to freedom. When you stop seeking validation from others, you reclaim your power. You no longer have to chase approval. Your worth becomes evident in your actions, your energy, and your presence. By letting go of the need to be seen or valued by others, you step into a life of true authenticity. This is where real strength lies, not in how others perceive you, but in how deeply you know and honor yourself. Through detachment, you find the true strength of your being. It's a quiet strength that doesn't need to shout to be heard, but speaks clearly through your actions, your boundaries, and your unshakable sense of self. It's the strength of the lotus, blooming in its own time, in its own way, radiating peace even in the midst of adversity. So, as you walk this journey, remember that your value is not defined by anyone else. You do not need to prove your worth, seek validation, or beg for recognition. You are enough just as you are. And like the lotus, you will bloom when the time is right. Your beauty, your wisdom, and your strength will shine through, regardless of whether others see it in the moment. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to Mindful Glow for more content like this. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What's your experience with self-worth and detachment? How have you learned to embrace your own growth and authenticity? See you in the next video.